All right, today we're jumping headfirst into one of the most psychologically complex and, let's be honest, misunderstood roles in modern relationships, the cuckoldress. Now, this is a role that goes so far beyond just simple permission. It really demands a level of strategic skill and emotional intelligence that might actually surprise you. So, we're going to break it all down. Our source material kicks off with this really powerful idea. And it frames the whole thing not just as, a physical act, but as this carefully calibrated psychological performance. It's a pretty compelling and, frankly, intense way to look at it, right?
So what does it really mean to wield your own autonomy as a psychological instrument? How does that work in the real world? Well, to understand that, we have to start with the mental game, because that's where the real power is.
First things first, you've got to understand that according to our source, the real action, the real power, it's not physical. Nope. It's all happening in the mind. This is where the entire dynamic is built, and it's where it's sustained.
And this is the absolute core of it. I mean, think about it. An actual encounter might last an hour, maybe two, but the psychological event, the anticipation building up before, and all the processing that happens after, that can stretch on for days, even weeks. A skilled cuckoldress knows she's managing a mental experience for her partner, not just a physical one. And these tactics are how it's done. I mean, just look at this list. Real-time texts during a date, visible evidence, like smudged lipstick, even getting the primary partner involved in the prep work. Every single one of these actions is designed to blur the lines between being an observer and a participant, stretching that mental experience way, way beyond the actual event itself. But here's the thing, not everyone uses these tactics for the same reason. It's really important to know that the cuckoldress is not a monolith. Our source actually points to several distinct archetypes, and they each have pretty different motivations and methods. This table lays it out perfectly. You've got the sensual, who's really driven by pleasure, all the way over to the lifestyle, where this is a fully baked-in part of the relationship. And then you have the dominant, where the focus is explicitly on power and control. And that is probably the clearest example of using sexual autonomy as that psychological instrument we talked about. Their goals are all just fundamentally different. So, no matter which archetype we're talking about, what does it actually take to pull this off successfully? This next part breaks down the specific skills and the very distinct phases of any encounter. You can kind of think of every encounter as a three-act play. You've got the pre-game, which is all about building that tension and anticipation. Then there's the encounter itself, a really delicate balancing act of pleasure, ethics, and trust. But you know what? The aftermath is arguably the most critical part. This is where the primary relationship is reaffirmed and all that intense emotional processing happens. And these are the skills you need to manage that three-act play. I mean, this is so far beyond just being adventurous. We're talking about some seriously high-level emotional intelligence, the ability to read subtle psychological shifts, to compartmentalize emotions. These are the skills nobody really talks about, but they are absolutely essential. And this brings us to a really crucial and frankly dangerous element, what our source calls the humiliation paradox. It draws a very sharp line between erotic humiliation, which is a fantasy that works precisely because it contradicts a secure, loving reality, and actual, genuine humiliation, which causes real psychological harm because it pokes at real insecurities. Navigating that line requires incredible sensitivity and trust. It's a tightrope walk. Okay, so let's bring all of this back down to earth for a second. Beyond all the psychological theory, the source is really clear that this lifestyle involves some very real and often not so glamorous practical challenges and pretty significant risks. So yeah, what are those hidden costs? What are the logistical and emotional burdens that come with trying to manage this kind of complex relationship structure? The practical stuff here is just immense. And it's often kind of boring. I mean, beyond the obvious costs and the scheduling headaches, just think about the sheer emotional exhaustion of managing multiple people's needs and expectations, or the difficulty of vetting new partners to make sure they're ethical and respectful. This isn't just fun and games. It is significant emotional and logistical labor. And this is what happens when things go wrong. When that boundary enforcement we talked about fails, you get erosion. When the psychological reading is off, you risk serious emotional disconnection. And sometimes the fantasy just can't hold up to reality, what the source calls compersion failure. These are the very real perils that can fracture a relationship. So, if there's one thing to take away, it's this. Being a cuckoldress is not some casual hobby. According to our source, it is a demanding role that requires this rare combination of psychological insight, emotional discipline, and a deep, deep commitment to ethical communication with everyone involved. Which really leaves us with this final question to think about. Is this dynamic, when it's done right, a true masterclass in radical honesty in communication? Or is it, ultimately, a fantasy that's just so psychologically complex, with so many moving parts, that it's nearly impossible to control in the long run? You know, the answer probably depends entirely on the people involved.